Hi, everyone. Welcome, welcome, welcome. We're just going to wait a few minutes while we'll let everyone log in. And I'd just like to welcome everyone for joining. And I'd love to encourage folks to put their name in the comments and where they're coming from. And we'll get started here shortly. So hi, everyone, and welcome. I'm so excited you're here for today's conversation. Beyond One Lane, the power of understanding your full nonprofit ecosystem. At the Nonprofit Hive, we believe that collaboration and connection are where the magic happens. This session is all about exploring what it means to really see the full picture of your organization, not just your own role, but how all those pieces fit together to create impact. The Nonprofit Hive is built by and for community, and that includes taking turns facilitating this session. So today I have the pleasure of guiding us through this conversation. For anyone I haven't met, I'm Nicole Jamrozinski, Director of Operations and Partnerships here at the Nonprofit Hive. My work focuses on building connections between people, organizations, and ideas so we can work smarter together rather than in silos. It's something I'm really passionate about because I've seen firsthand how collaboration can transform both teams and communities. Whether you're watching live or catching the replay, thank you for being here. We'd love to know who's with us today, so please drop a quick hello in the comments. Tell us where you're tuning in from and which organization you're with. The Hive community is global and full of incredible people, so don't be shy about connecting in the chat. You never know who you're going to meet. So before we dive in, we'd like to thank our session sponsor, the Panelists Group. The Panelists Group is a boutique social impact management firm focused on leadership development, team building, and organizational health. They do incredible work helping organizations strengthen from the inside out, which ties beautifully into today's theme of understanding and connecting across your full nonprofit ecosystem. Now, I'd love to pass the mic over to our speakers, who each bring their own unique perspective. I'll open the floor to each of you to tell us a little bit about yourself and why you're excited about this topic. Joanna, I'll start with you.
Hi, everyone. Want to give a brief thank you to the Nonprofit Hive. I'm really excited to be here and chat with you all on this topic. I am a government relations manager at Big Brothers Big Sisters of New York City, as well as a career and leadership coach for neurodivergent professionals. And something that's really exciting for me in being here today is this is a topic that I didn't know much about until several years ago, and that it existed as more of a hypothetical because I had really existed in silos in my work, I think, for a long time. And it's something that over the past several years has become more and more clear to me just how impactful it is to break across silos and to form cross-functional relationships. So I'm really excited to dive in. I think this is a super pertinent topic to the nonprofit field today, and I can't wait to discuss it with everyone.
Thanks so much, Joanna. It's funny when we don't realize we're in silos, how jarring it is when we find out we actually are in them. Tommy, can I hand it over to you?
Hello, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Tommy Pritchett Rodriguez, and I currently serve as the Development and Grant Director for Devereaux. I also occasionally will take on grant contract work on the side. My experience in nonprofit has been development director for over 10 years in very small local nonprofit organizations where I often operated as a department of one. So by nature, I was a silo and have really noticed over my career how teamwork makes the dream work. I always say that, and I really believe that, especially in the nonprofit community. And, we should rely on our teams within our organization and partner with as many community partners as we can to really make systemic change within our communities. So I'm really excited to have this conversation today with all of you.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Tommy. Teamwork is the dream work. I love that. Stephen, can I hand it over to you?
So I'm Stephen Cook. I'm the Director of Operations for a few different organizations, as well as the owner of a consulting firm. Silos are something that I have long fought against. I've seen how detrimental they are. When I first entered into the nonprofit arena, the organization that I worked for, even when it came to strategic thinking, strategic placing, it was very siloed out. It was very, well, what are you going to do this year? What are you going to do this year? And what are you going to do this year? With nothing to tie everybody together. And so it just led to a lot of different problems and issues and just no cohesiveness. So just being able to break through those, I've seen do astronomical things. So I'm super excited about this topic.
Thanks, Stephen. I'm loving the perspective of the multiple hats thing too, because I think that's going to tie in nicely to this conversation. So thank you all so much for being here and lending your voices to this conversation. I'm really thrilled to have each of you with us. So thank you. And let's just jump in. So we'll start with the question that really sets the stage for everything else. What has helped you understand the bigger picture of your organization beyond your own role? Nonprofit work often happens in silos, but real impact requires collaboration. What helped you move from just my job to understanding how all those pieces fit together? Joanna, can I start with you?
Yeah. I started by introducing myself and sharing several years ago how I was kind of existing in silos. So I will start there. So I would say one thing that happened, so I'll take you all back like 3 or 4 years ago, say about 4 years ago, I was working as the director of program innovation at Big Brothers Big Sisters of New York City. And I loved my work. I loved my organization. I had so many great relationships. But one thing was I had so many great relationships primarily within my own program department, which was a pretty big department because I'm working at a mid-sized organization. This is the biggest department in the organization. But when I became the director of program innovation, I started to collaborate more with other departments. And probably one of my favorite experiences was I took on a project that involves supporting a major change in our intake department. And now, mind you, I loved the intake department. I knew they were doing so much amazing work behind the scenes, but it was very hypothetical. I'd worked alongside them pre-pandemic. I was sitting beside, for years, I sat beside the intake department at the office. So I knew their work. I knew it. I thought I knew it. Let's say I thought I knew their work. And in this project, I was actually coming in from the innovative standpoint of how do I make this major change that they're going through to improve the intake department? How can I support them through that? And what I started with was, I don't know enough to support them through this. I started having one-to-one conversations with every staff member in the department. And I was stunned, truly, like I was stunned everything that went into the day-to-day work in this department that I sat beside them for years and did not realize. So this was my first opportunity, and there have been a lot of opportunities since then, but this was the very first one that I got to actually work with a different department intimately. And what I got out of that wasn't just the work with that department and learning about them. Well, it was learning about all the different areas that partnered with that department. So I would say that was my first experience and kind of paved the way for other experiences to come.
I love that. I really appreciate the staying curious and like asking specific questions to the team members to understand their perspective. So love that approach. Thank you so much for sharing that. Stephen, how about yourself?
I think that as we started to grow, like I kind of alluded to before, like we were very singular in our strategic thinking and how we wanted to go forward. And so what I did was I introduced OKRs. okay, ours are your objective and your key results, but pretty much in a short, they pretty much pick a couple of really important things for your organization, a couple of very important goals, and they put everybody aligned on those goals. The nice thing about that was because we were all forcing toward the same goals, then in our meetings and stuff like that, we consistently referenced those goals, but it also showed like what people were doing toward those goals, which really opened up the eyes of like, I'm an operations guy, so everything's hands-on for me. Like by the time it gets to my areas, it's generally through all the hypothetical stages and the funding stages and the stuff like that, and then I just get to do it. And so it was really eye-opening, and to see all the work that went into the planning and to the fundraising and to stuff like that. That previously, because it wasn't my area, it wasn't something I paid a lot of attention to. And then suddenly it was like, wow, like that's a lot. And then it became a how can I help? And so instead of just being like, okay, well, my day-to-day operations are like this, but it's like, okay, well, what can I do within that to help the fundraising, or what can I do in that to help the development? So it was pretty fun or eye-opening there.
I love that. The shared values and then wanting to help your team. I think those two go hand in hand. And I think when we can all have like the same vision and goal and understanding the process to get there, the more success we're going to have as organizations. So love that approach. Tommy, what about yourself?
Yeah, so I love what Joanna said about, being curious and not knowing enough. I feel like we could never know enough about what our teams are doing because it's always growing and changing, and things are adapting as need increases in the community. So similarly, I've tried to be more curious with my team members and truly trying to figure out, what does your day-to-day look like? What are your pain points? What are things that, really motivate you and keep you going? And, trying to find ways to support not only in solving a problem, but also in, just uplifting and continuing to nurture the things that work correctly. So kind of like Stephen is an operations guy, I started looking more deeply at processes and procedures. How can we, tighten up areas where maybe organizationally we're not structured properly so that we can really, smooth out those kinks and things can work, cross-functionally a little bit more smoothly.
You are like singing all the songs for me right now. At the nonprofit, we're also going through some pretty big process structure projects, and I get really excited thinking about just how streamlined it can be and really getting to understand everything that goes into all the parts. So I love those perspectives. All right, so jumping to the next question. What gets in the way of cross-functional collaboration, and how do we address it? Whether it's unclear roles or misaligned goals or lack of communication, silos form for a reason. So what have you seen create friction between teams, and how have you helped break those down? Stephen, I'm going to start with you.
So I think the biggest thing with the silos is that it starts to, it begins innocent enough, and you're like, well, I'm just concentrating on my job. And then it spreads to us versus them. I'm working much harder than they are, or things like that. And it never means to go that way, but it almost always does. So when you start to have more communication and you start to break those silos down and you start to really look at the other sections, I mean, like, instead of this is my job, that's your job, but more of a like, how can I help? How can I use what I know? How can I use my expertise to help you? Because I know that at the same time, you're going to do the same backwards to me. It starts to pull apart that us versus them, which then brings everybody as a team. Once you're working better as a team, then going toward the same goal, you can really start to just focus that energy that was spent on all those side feelings and stuff like that more on the mission. It frees up bandwidth. But also, there's things that would generally take me, I don't know, I had to make a booklet. And that booklet took me, I'm not even joking, a week to make, because I am not a graphics guy. Like, to sit on Canva and to do it. And then I was struggling. And one of my teammates was like, oh, hold on, I'm good at that. I got you. And in 2 hours, recreated what took me the entire week to do and upped it so much higher. It was insane. But it all came because of that communication where it was like, yes, that was in my department. It was something that we needed, but they were able to help. But it was because of that communication back and forth.
That's amazing. I love the honesty that you were willing to share too in that space. And I think there's something really interesting about, we always have to give ourselves and each other grace. There's this, like, if we can come in at it understanding that everybody has the best intentions and it's not that us against them, I think that will help the team in the long run overall. So thank you for sharing those. Tommy, what about yourself?
Yeah, so as development, my major focus is fundraising. So it's interesting, as nonprofit organizations, we often operate under the scarcity mindset that there's not enough donors and there's not enough funding out there to support our organization when there's, hundreds of other organizations also in the community. But that's just not really true. However, internally, we kind of get that same scarcity mindset going too with our departments. There's not enough funding for this program, or there's not enough funding for this, service that we offer. But that's also not really true. It's a matter of how can we get there together. Having those conversations and being really creative, thinking outside of grants or thinking outside of fundraising events. There are ways for us to be able to spread the wealth internally so that we can, fund all of those projects and programs. But I see it sometimes with program managers. If this program over here is getting funded, then they feel like they're not getting the support that they need, or we need to change our perspective of where we're putting our efforts. But we're one organization, we're working towards the same thing. So the idea is really to get out of that scarcity mindset and realize if we can all share the same message, if we can all work towards that goal together, we're in it together. We'll make it work. That's what we do.
The nonprofit community is resilient, if nothing else. So we will make it work. I 100% agree with that. It's funny you bring up events. My background's events. So that's actually where I saw the big silos and then the breakdown of silos once we started pulling in the communications team and like hearing how they were speaking about it, bringing in the programs team and understanding what they were how they spoke about their program, and then the fundraising team. And it was working on one of our largest signature events, I got to see like from start to finish and like how I played into those roles because I had touch points with every single participant or donor. And it was just such a rewarding space to be in because I understood this person's actually really well suited to be connected with this colleague. And it was like I was playing matchmaker and I really enjoyed that piece. So I love that you brought that up. Joanna, can I hand it over to you?
Yes, I'm so excited for this question. I'm sure everyone could see me vigorously nodding in response. Yeah, I want to work off of what you shared, Tommy, in terms of a scarcity mindset. I think that that's something that's so pervasive in the nonprofit space and for very understandable reasons. And with that in mind, I think when we think about some of the things that get in the way of cross-functional collaboration, one of the things that comes to mind for me is how we think about cross-functional collaboration, because if we're viewing it from the perspective of, I don't have the time and capacity for this, and I'll get into another aspect that comes to mind when I say that, but if we're thinking about it from the perspective of, I don't have the time and capacity, we're not necessarily seeing the ways that other departments can help us be more efficient, get the job done faster, and get it done better. So I think that's something that I think it's so cool that in this space, my main background is program. We've got operations, events, and fundraising and development. And I think it's so interesting that it's coming from each of us here. But one of the things that I found when I shifted from program into very recently, and just 2 years ago, I guess not that recently anymore, government relations, is that I was doing a lot of work that I secretly realized a year later I was replicating work being done in another department that I had no idea I had replicated. And as I dove deeper into other departments, I realized, oh, wow, this collaboration means one less thing that I need to do. So from like a perspective of not enough time, which is something we're all dealing with, collaboration can actually reduce the amount of time that we have to spend working on something. So it can be really productive from a time management lens. But I also don't want to not speak to like systemic aspects and just organizational aspects in general. I could get into the how the whole funding ecosystem impacts scarcity, but I'll just speak from the broader organization and say it's really important when we want staff members to collaborate that staff members are not too overwhelmed to collaborate, that we're thinking about their roles such that there is at least a little time built in for cross-functional collaboration. So I think it needs to happen in terms of the individual mindset shift, but also in terms of the organization from the top really prioritizing cross-functional collaboration.
Yeah, thank you so much for bringing up the point of leadership and how it is driven by how they operate and what they're willing to accept as the normal culture. So I think that's a really, really valid point. Something I used to do in a previous organization, we would have our year in review, and every staff member had an opportunity to put what their jobs and tasks were on this long calendar of sticky notes. And it created this space to see like, wow, look at all the stuff we're doing. But it also pinpointed key areas where like, this team's very busy in the fall. How can we help these folks out? Or, okay, so all of these projects need to be done. Marketing touches every single one of them. Can we please give marketing more time to do their job? Please give them enough notice to do the thing. And I think just being honest about what is on people's plates, when things can be moved and when things can be adjusted, I think is a really important space to also be considering how we collaborate, how we kind of break down some of these barriers and silos. So I love all of those points. Thank you so much for sharing those. I'm going to jump into the next question. So what ripple effects have you seen when silos break down for individuals, organizations, or communities? When teams understand each other and collaborate well, what changes and what becomes possible? Can I hand it over to Tommy?
Yeah, I love this question because it just kind of it shows us the results of our collective action, right? In Orlando, where I live, we have a arts organization that it's called United Arts, and essentially they pool all of the local arts organizations, theaters and museums and cultural celebrations and festivals and things. They pull all of those organizations together to collaborate for an annual fundraiser, but also to market all of those organizations' programming throughout the year. It's very unique, I think, because I haven't really seen this promoted or shared in other communities. But it's very interesting because all of these organizations have similar audiences, and they publish a newsletter every month. They publish a magazine every quarter or so. And they're sharing stories about artists. They're sharing stories about community members who volunteer. They're really doing, a really great job of collaborating with other organizations, but also highlighting, what is happening in the community because of that. And it's a really beautiful thing to see, because, especially during the challenges of COVID and everything, it really allowed the community to rally behind these organizations because they're such an important part of the fabric of our community. And I think that we could do that in other sectors as well if we really did push to collaborate with one another, even if we're doing similar work, even if we're sharing donors, even if we have a similar audience or community that we're serving, right? The more of us that work together, the larger the impact that we can have. And I think that we just need to tap into that more, as organizations internally and as organizations within our communities, to really, make something beautiful and long lasting.
I love that. And we are bigger together. And I think tying back to your scarcity comment, like the pie doesn't have to stay the same size. It can be bigger and we can do things better together. Thank you. That's beautiful. Joanna, over to you.
Thanks so much for that, Tommy. I think that was really amazing to hear. And it made me think of something that I found really amazing at Big Brothers Big Sisters of New York City when we were part of kind of a joint collective of a few different organizations that were specifically focusing on serving LGBTQ plus youth. And one of those things that happened, and I think happens in a lot of these cases, is when organizations are no longer siloed, we're able to get the resources to the communities that we serve in a way that is much more impactful. So, for instance, something that we were able to bring to this kind of joint collective was we could come in and say, hey, something that my organization is struggling with is having enough referrals for mental health professionals in the community, let's say, and getting some of those answers from other organizations, which meant not just do we have more resources, but that means the communities that we serve, the families that we serve, are not just having access to what we as a single organization have access to, but what so many different organizations working together across New York City have access to.
Mm-hmm. That's amazing. When I just love the idea of working together in partnership and thinking outside the box, how we can support one another. Whereas there's so many great organizations doing really amazing things in one area. And I feel like oftentimes like we almost get pulled into these separate directions trying to get funding from this organization or that organization. And instead of honing in on what we're really good at, we kind of get scope creep and we don't think about the other people doing the work that are also really great at that specific project. So I love what you've shared, Joanna, and how you guys were really able to help support the community as a whole, and not just thinking kind of in that organizational mindset. Thank you. Stephen, over to you.
Yeah, man, this is hard. I don't know about going after those two. No, I think that the thought of that scarcity mindset really does scare a lot of organizations. Funding is hard, especially these days. It just seems to be getting harder and harder. People are struggling, so they're pulling in on the purse strings. So it's easy to really silo off your organization and try to just be like, I'm just focusing on how do I get the funding to do our mission. A couple years ago, one of the organizations that I do operations for is a kids backpack program, a feeding backpack. As we sit there and every year we work with the school districts, we work with the schools, how do we get them the backpacks, stuff like that. And then we've had at times where we've been able to partner with other organizations where they were like, oh, hey, we're going to give out backpacks of food. Sorry. I'm going to give out backpacks of food or things like that for the weekend, or I'm going to give out school supplies, or it's coming into winter, so we want to give out jackets, none of which are in our mission, none of which are in our scope per se. But because we're already in the schools, because we're already have those relationships built with administrators and stuff like that, we were able to just kind of go in and be like, okay, we can have the conversations. Can you use backpacks of school supplies? Well, of course. Great. We'll bring them on our next delivery. It doesn't take any more work for our guys to deliver an extra box. Or, hey, can you guys use jackets and stuff like that? It doesn't take any more work on our part per se, but it drastically increased what those other organizations that were a little bit smaller were a little bit larger, which was great. But we could increase what they were able to accomplish because we were working together, even though, it wasn't necessarily in our realm. But also because we were doing stuff like that, what we found is all three of our organizations grew our donor base, because instead of our donors being afraid or being like, oh, well, why would you use our resources to help there? What all of three saw was that, oh, these organizations are working as a network and they're able to make a larger impact, and the larger impact struck chords, and all three of us saw donations increase. So just as a secondary effect, it wasn't necessarily what we were going for, but it was also one thing that we were kind of afraid of, was how would the donors think if we were going outside of necessarily our little box, and it had the opposite effect.
100%. And I love that when we can tell the story together, it is going to make bigger impact, and people are going to be excited about that. They want to be part of that change. And I think there's something really beautiful about doing that together as a community, as organizations. And that is inspiring to me. And it's definitely, I understand why people would definitely want to support groups like that. So thank you. That's a really great example. The next question I have, I'm going to start with you, Joanna, and it's not all orgs are structured the same. So how does your organization size affect collaboration? Stephen shared a great example there. Whether you're a 5-person team or a mid-sized nonprofit, your structure shapes how people interact. How have you seen collaboration work or struggle based on the size or setup of your organization?
So I want to preface this with a lot of my work has been within mid-sized nonprofits. So I do want to begin with that. And I will say, I think from the perspective of a mid-sized nonprofit, it can be pretty easy to fall into silos when you have a significant number of folks in each department or in each of the, largest departments. So, but I'm thinking back to when I was at a smaller organization as well. And I remember there still being able to be silos, even with it being a much smaller organization. So what I think it comes back to is, I think it comes back to intention, regardless of organizational size. So to what degree are we really prioritizing collaboration and seeing the impact of collaborating cross-functionally? Because even in a smaller organization, sometimes it can feel like maybe there are 10 of us, but I have to do everything related to middle school. So I'm not going to have the capacity to chat with those working in high school programming, let alone those doing development and those doing the one person doing marketing. I think it really does come back to, is the organization overall prioritizing collaboration? and making sure that that comes both top down and bottom up, that it's really just infused throughout the organizational culture.
Yeah, that's a great point. You really have to be intentional about this entire thing. And if you're not, it's very easy to fall into silos. Thank you for sharing that. Stephen, how about yourself?
I think depending on, it's much easier for a smaller organization to really to strategize on how to make sure that collaboration works. The smaller organizations that I'm in, it's nice. There's a small team. You all gonna get together. You're all in there. The larger the organization, it does get a little bit harder to pull it. Some of the things that I've enjoyed, we've tried to make assign owners to projects. So anything that we're going to do, we've decided that we want to make it strategic. So if we're going to do something, then it needs to serve a purpose. And so we've assigned a leader to that. But then that leader has to work with all the different departments and stuff like that in order to make it all successful, which has been nice because then we rotate around leaders and stuff like that, trying to give people an opportunity to lead projects, but also it forces people to see the different aspects and how much work they're having to put in and what it takes to run a successful event and stuff like that. And so that's been a really nice piece to it to get everybody together. Another thing that we've kind of done is, as crazy as it sounds, we've banned electronics from our meeting rooms. And the reason for that is when you get into a meeting and you happen to be there 10 minutes early, you get on your phone and you walk into the room and everybody's staring at their phone. And then as soon as the meeting starts, everybody puts it away. Some people still are on their phone during the meeting, whatever. But when we took them out of the room and we're like, you're not even allowed to bring your phone into the room or your computer. Then when people sat down at the table, then they really had no other option than to talk to people. And as soon as you start talking to people, then you start to learn about their job. You learn about their family. You learn about a lot of different aspects about them, which also you can start to take people away from just, it's easy to be like, oh, that person runs that department. And that's all you know about them. And they're not really a person per se. They run that department. Whereas once you start to talking to them and you start to really learn more about them and they'll chat, even through the small talk, now it becomes more of a person. Now the collaboration starts to happen and they start to complain about something. Oh, I'm struggling here. Oh, I can't figure this out. And you're like, oh, well, that's easy. I can do that. I can help you with that. And that way is increased. It's been great.
I love that. Creating people-centered work environments. It's brilliant. I've worked at a lot of virtual organizations and so cameras always had to be on. We had water cooler chats monthly. So you had to have a weekly water cooler chat with someone from a different team and you couldn't talk about work. And it was 15 minutes and it was forced conversation. Was very easy, but I enjoyed all my colleagues, but it was just a nice way to just hear about how they're doing, learn about their pets. Do they have kids? I love the people, creating people. Tommy, what about yourself?
As an introvert, I have a love-hate relationship with networking internally or externally. So that sounds awesome, but also like a nightmare. But no, I think there's so much value in that, right? How else are we supposed to break down silos if we don't talk to each other? We have to talk to each other. We have to get to know each other. Development is a lot about relationship building, but so is everything else in our organization. I'm not the only department that, should focus on that, And I also love what you said about giving people ownership over projects. I think that that's a really great way as well to kind of not force collaboration, but really make every team member feel appreciated and valued and like they have control over something. Because I know that sometimes in our organizations, it's easy to feel like we're just carrying out, we're just spinning our wheels, right? We're doing the same thing every day, or, a new directive has come down from the executive director or another department lead or something. And, we're just doing what we can to stay afloat. But if we can each take ownership over something, even a small project, I think that that's really motivating for folks. And I also wanted to go back to what Joanna said about, having a culture of collaboration. I have primarily worked within really small organizations of less than, 20 employees, where we pretty much have, one or two people in each department. And it's easy to get siloed that way. And it's easy to feel like, we're all like just stuck in our own tasks and things and not being able to break out of that. But I feel like that's a culture problem, and that comes from leadership. We really need leaders who understand the value of, working together and not trying to keep things in, there's value to staying in your own lane, but we don't always have to do that. Like sometimes somebody else needs to take over driving for a little while. Like we each specialize in our own thing, and tapping into one another's strengths and abilities is really what is going to help us move forward. And that's something that I have tried to do in smaller organizations, is to really kind of empower people to take leadership over things. If we don't already have that culture of collaboration and ownership over projects, we can still do that. Even if we don't have that support from above, we can make that work. Years ago, I read a really great book called Monday Morning Leadership. It's a very short book, but I love that book because it teaches folks who are not in management or leadership roles how to have leadership within their organizations. Whether that's in their own department, or if that is just taking leadership over, increasing everybody's morale. We can each take leadership in our organizations, even if we don't have a title for that. And it just strengthens us. It makes us work better.
I love that. Thank you. I'm going to have to definitely check out that book. And I think a little autonomy never hurts anyone, and feeling that ownership. So thank you. I think those are great points. We do have 2 minutes left, so I'm hoping we can pull one question in from the comments here. And it's around, I think it's a really good one. When silos persist primarily due to personality clashes, how would you recommend moving past that? Does anyone want to jump in? I don't want to assume, because we're kind of throwing this one out there. Does anyone have a quick thought on that one? We can go around too and have 45 seconds each. Steven, do you want to go?
I think when it comes to personalities, when you get into leadership positions, a lot of times you're always going to have your bigger personalities. That they decided that they want things their way specifically. With that said, as the executive director and as the leadership, it's more of a necessity to get them to understand. So to talk to them, to make sure that we all have blind spots. We all have things in our personalities that we're like, you look back, you're like, oh, I wish I would have done that. But it is kind of to make sure that, like, hey, if this is your personality, this probably, this is something that needs to be worked on. I have grown to very much understand that the team is worth more than an individual. So sometimes, unfortunately, you could have the best person and the nicest person, and they're the wrong fit for a specific team. And that's not a knock on them. But the team dynamics, I've seen when you remove one person that kind of like stagnates things, I've watched teams blossom extremely quickly once the right fit is input into that position. And so sometimes hard calls have to be made, and that's unfortunate, but.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that, Stephen. Before we close off, does anyone have any other final comments? I know we're okay. Joanna, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I'll be quick. I think I agree with a lot of what Stephen said. And the one short thing that I'll add is I think it comes down a lot of the time to transparency from leadership, right? So when we're having silos really persisting because of those personality clashes, sometimes it can be easier to avoid it and kind of hope it goes away. And I think what's so important is that leadership is transparent about the fact that we do have a problem going on here, that there is something going on, and that we directly address it. I think what's unspoken can't be fixed. So for me, it comes down to that transparency.
I love that. Thank you for sharing that. Tommy, are you okay if we close it off, or do you have any thoughts that you'd like to share there?
I just wanted to say one thing really quick based off of what Joanna just said. Transparency and directly taking care of something, but also making sure that you follow through. So, leadership, recognizing that there's a problem and then following through with whatever the solution may be is really important. Otherwise, your team loses faith in you as a leader and the silos persist and everything continues to break down.
Trust is key. That is, I think, a fundamental component of this entire conversation. So thank you for wrapping that all up so beautifully, everyone. That was amazing. Thank you to all of the speakers. Thank you, everyone who joined the session. And if you haven't already, I'd love you to invite you to the Nonprofit Hive. It's an opportunity to have one-on-one conversations with beautiful humans like these people every week. And then just a shout out again to the Medalist group. Thank you so much for sponsoring this session and making it all possible. I hope you all have a great day, and thank you so much.